V is the Guerrilla Economist. He is somebody who's earned the stars on his shoulder and the scars from battle. Folks, his bona fides are on roguemoney.net as well as HomelandSecurityUS.com under the guest section. This is not somebody who should be taken lightly. He predicted many things, including the cleaning house of bankers. That in fact he predicted that or said that was beginning to happen on the 10th. And well ahead of January 10th, as a matter of fact, well ahead of what was going on. So with that, we're going to bring V on. V, welcome to the program. Go ahead and start us off, my brother.
Well, it's great to be on tonight, guys. Steve, Joe, and Doug, it's a pleasure once again. I mean, things are transpiring so quickly, and we are really, I mean, I often say at the precipice, but, man, I mean, things have gotten so beyond the point that we are, folks, at a critical juncture, probably the most critical juncture as we are continuing on in this collapsing economy, as structures are breaking. I remember back on January the 10th, it was at another venue. It was actually Paul Sandhu's radio show over in Canada, where I was talking about multinational banks and how they are intermarried with intelligence agencies. And that's one of the things I touched upon. I touched upon also back in November 20th that, there's going to be a cleaning house that's going to occur, and you're going to see hit teams in full action taking on mid-level guys. And that's what exactly has been transpiring. My sources have indicated that there have been quite a few people, about 3 dozen or so, that are on that list. And as these numbers begin to increase, folks, this is a sign. This is a major sign that we are close to the end. Now, there are some pundits out there that have said, well, you know what, bankers, committing suicide, that happens as the economy is going down. Well, the fact is, folks, the last time we've had bankers commit suicide by jumping out of the window of their buildings or trade houses and their skyscrapers are back in the 20s, and that was after a market crash. This is the first time in history where you have a large number of individuals all of a sudden committing suicide, quote unquote, and the market's going up 6, 7, 8%. So this is unprecedented. These things are just not your typical traders. These are men who are in very lofty, very high positions. These are individuals that know certain things. They are very keen to certain goings-ons in the bank. There are individuals that will be privy to certain deals, certain negotiations, certain trades that have passed through their desk or seen skirting across their computer screen. So this is not just a mere trader who made bets on a few stocks, hedged a couple of wrong bets, and all of a sudden his the investment, the bet goes down south and he jumps out the window. No. This is far much more than that. And this has everything to do with a dying, decrepit system that is called the Anglo-American banking system. Okay, that is called, this whole thing is collapsing in front of us. And folks, this is what we're seeing right now, is cleaning house. And I'm going to try my best to get into that. There are certain things tonight that I will tell you, certain things that I cannot tell you. And I will try my best to show you. We're all excited. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that are listening right now to my voice, and you're wondering about names and who's involved and all these things. And these things are nice to know, but we cannot lose sight of the big picture. And the big picture is that I'm going to really showcase for you, because this is just a microcosmic symptom of a big picture and a major global paradigm shift that is going on. And that shift, folks, is what I'm going to show you, is the death and destruction of not only the United States dollar, but the entire Western banking system is being thrown out the window. And these are all symptomatic reverberations of actions that are taken abroad that are finally coming home to roost. So tonight is going to be an exciting program. as I try to detail clearly what's going on and where we're headed. And that's important for all of you to know. Because if there's one thing that I want all of you to know, is that if you have not taken steps in order to preserve your wealth, if you have not taken those steps in order to ensure your financial survival and those of your families, folks, you got to do that quickly. And that is the most important thing, that we all are going to be prepared for the greatest economic transition in global history, the likes of which have never been seen, and probably the likes of which we will never see again. Not to this level and not to this state. Most of all, I'm going to show you what happens when a country becomes so blinded by its own hubris, so puffed up in its pride, that it begins to fall on the very sabers that it rattles. And folks, let me tell you, tonight is going to be that night. And I hope to God that some veils will be pulled back, some scales will be fallen from some people's eyes, and they begin to see a very clear and distinct picture, because the hour is that critical. I don't care what you're into. I don't care what is your favorite TV show. Whatever is going on tonight, folks, this is going to be the most important 3 hours of radio you will ever listen to. And I'm going to tell you tonight, you're going to get first row seats as we go through this whole chicanery with all four of us at the helm. And with that, I will either pass it over to you, Doug, or Steve, or Joe.
Well, let me introduce Steve, folks, if you're listening to us for the first time. Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com. Now, V has contributed numerous alerts to stevequayle.com. Folks, you can go back and you can see the build-up to exactly where we are today. This is a very sobering, very important, extremely critical broadcast. Please listen to both of these gentlemen. Joe and I are going to be in the background here with that. And by the way, we've dispensed with all of the preliminaries. So now with that, Steve, welcome to the show.
Well, good evening, and I echo and just want to say what V has laid out as the introduction is probably, as explicit and as poignant as can be made. You know, it's interesting that people are watching the total destruction of the global economy. Doug, this week, and all the listeners who have been looking at my website and V's website, I know that the EU has openly stated they are going to consider taking all the savings of the European Union countries that belong to it for the good of the EU. I think what most people have got to understand is the amazing timing of all this, because we had the Vatican firing basically their head financial guy, and there's a whole story there that maybe we'll get to and maybe we won't. But I want to remind everybody, when Jesus said the love of money is the root of all evil, then the control of money is the control of all evil. And now I want to give you a new statement. He who controls the money of the world controls the world. Now remember, we're told in the scripture to be wise. We're told to be observant. So many times Jesus said, lift up your eyes, for your redemption draweth nigh. And I don't think people get the idea, or even most Christianity, I would say, and this is a safe call, 90% of those who profess to be Christians, I can only deal with them, is they understand the lateness of the hour, how everything in their world is going to change. In the book of Revelation, we know that the time comes when no man can buy or sell, and no man can carry on commerce except he takes the infamous mark of the beast. I remember, Doug, when I first started on talk radio, that was looking forward. That was before all of the technology that was being developed or had been developed was brought out. It's almost like God in his mercy withheld certain truths until the people could understand and apply it. That's why so many times in the Proverbs, that's why so many times the Holy Spirit is warning and provoking the people of God to apply their hearts to understanding. And what V just said about turning off the TV, I have maintained that in order for a person to get their thinking back and their cognitive skills and abilities back, they've got to turn off the television. And we're not going to go into the mind control and the ELF, extreme low frequency, and all of the RFI, radio frequency, all the stuff, mind control. But what we're trying to do tonight is we're trying to put the world on pause for everyone so that they might understand what's at stake. Now, in the last week, today's Monday, towards the end of last week, John Corzine, MF Global, and if anybody doesn't know what MF Global was, it was probably one of the biggest rip-offs in plain sight where billions got stolen right before your very eyes. He's going to be responsible, or he's going to be the head of MyRA, M-Y-R-A, the government's plan to move every IRA, pension, every defined benefit program, everything into a pool that they will administer. Well, Doug, that's like giving a vampire the head, making him the head of the Red Cross, and anybody hoping that anybody who needs blood is ever going to be able to get a transfusion. When they say they can't squeeze blood out of a turnip, let me say this, they will try. Unfortunately, the turnip will be the very lives of the people that have worked so hard, whose futures are being robbed. And this is something that I think is interesting. Most people have a 24-hour time clock that is now irrelevant. You may sleep or not sleep, as some of us are in that category. You may go to work, come home, do what you do, and have a 24-hour day divided up into 3 segments, 2 segments, whatever, or one solid segment. But these entities never sleep. Their evil plans, plots, and schemes are in motion. Years ago, I came up with a little poem, okay? And it was Rape, Pillage, and Plunder, the United States is going under. I got so much hell mail. You know what hell mail is. People, are absolutely not only telling me to go to hell, but they're raking me over the fires of the coals of hell, or V or whoever that tries to tell them the truth. The thing is that they do not want to take personal responsibility for their own future. They want someone to tell them what to do, someone to show them what to do, and then if something goes wrong, they want someone to blame. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight, each one of you must take hold of your life. I want you to put your left hand on your left side of your head and your right hand on the right side of your head, and I want you just to move it back and forth. Don't give yourself whiplash, and say, wake up, wake up, wake up, because we have to understand the lateness of the hour. And I love this statement. People tell me, well, you guys talk too much about money. Jesus taught in the parables that if you're not faithful with the unrighteous mammon, you won't be faithful with the true riches. And this is what we're trying to get across to you. I talked, Doug, today, and this is a fascinating number. I talked to probably one of the highest placed precious metals traders in the world. That's not bragging, he is. He's worked for the biggest names, and he's also the vice president of one of the biggest companies in the world. And I asked him simply, I said, my brother, I said, how much physical gold and silver is available in a given day throughout the country that people can buy? And I'll tell you this was amazing. I told V this earlier because I thought it was way more than this. He said there's only $750 million. And he ran through the calculations, and, this counts the U.S. Mint, the Royal Canadian Mint, all the mints. To put that into perspective, 750 millionaires, if they had $1 million liquid, could buy all the gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. Now, that's not the paper market, which is in the billions and tens of billions. But there is nothing backing it up. And what B is going to get into is this, is when you interfere with the paradigm of the day, or what I would call the mass hallucinations of unreality, courtesy of the mainstream vomit brokers. And I want to say this too, ladies and gentlemen. If you watch the mainstream network news, and I don't care which ones you want to put in there, it doesn't matter. You are listening to literally the manifestation of the mouthpieces of hell. Now someone says, well, that doesn't sound very good. It's because it isn't. They are owned by the very people that are picking your pockets. They are owned by the very people that are controlling your mind. And so what we're talking about tonight is literally a wake-up take charge of your thoughts, put those into action, and recognize that when we started talking years ago, Doug, and I started talking on talk radio in the preparation days, survival, pre-Y2K and all that stuff, food was the number one concern. It still is. And it doesn't matter if it's 9 million or 8 million pounds of hamburger going into secret government bunkers or Velveeta cheese. And I thought, I don't know if you thought, I thought, what a perfect thing for the rats in their underground bunkers. But, you know, tons and tons of Velveeta cheese. I think it's kind of a prophetic picture myself. And all the drugs that are drying up. And today the biggest news across the world is that almost all antibiotics are now made in China. Well, boy, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you're ready to make war against a nation, all you got to do is change the formulations of a few carbon chains and some of this stuff, and you got how should I say this? You've got a preemptive attack that was coming out of a medicine bottle. So when we're talking largely about the finances and all the dead bankers and all of the manipulations going on, the mainstream press would like you to believe that these men and women are just people that are, you know, basically sad the way the market went and they took their own life. I defy anybody to shoot themselves in the head 8 or 10 times with a staple gun and in the heart, especially when that person was planning on a date with his wife or significant other. I defy anybody to tell me it's suicide when you're found in a garage hanging by the neck and there's no way that the rope or whatever could have been attached, the chain, to that garage unless it was a professional assassin. When V told the story, and I'm going to turn it right back over to him, that the teams were loosed, okay, I watched some of the biggest names without naming them, who everybody turns on and watches them on Alex or talk. They wouldn't touch the dead banker issue with the 10-foot pole until V came out with it. And I'm giving credit to whom credit due, honor whom honors due. I don't flatter my brother, but I acknowledge the gifting of my brother. He was raised up for such a time like this. He told us about the Bundesbank, and now, ladies and gentlemen, he's telling you what's going on. This is not just simply a group of, let's say this, barely related murders. This is not political assassinations. This is covering the tracks of the biggest scam in the history of the world, and basically the words of Rothschild when he said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who writes its laws." Everybody in Congress, pretty much, I will say this, the majority in Congress, the majority in the Senate, if not the majority plus in the Senate, they're bought off, ladies and gentlemen. They're either bought off with cash or they're compromised with perversions. So the point is tonight, how does this affect you? Well, as the night goes on, we're going to tell you how it affects you. And for the sake of your family, shake yourself. Wake up. Arise, thou, all of you who dwell in the dust, and shake the dust off, because what's happening is these vultures, these venomous pythons from the pit, these hyenas and jackals are yelping and mocking you for how dumb you are. And I think that God wants to wake his people up. It was Doug, Joe, V, you know the scripture. God said his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, not because they're not presented with the truth, but because they deny the truth. Go ahead, V.
You know what Steve said is absolutely right. I mean, you have a very critical time right now. And most importantly is this, folks. You got to get this into your heads. You got to understand that we are facing a massive, massive change. And this change, began to happen. It's been in the works for a while. It's been happening since 2008 when the U.S. economy collapsed. And look, let's be honest here. We never recovered. We never ever bounced back from 2008, when in fact what we've been doing since then is digging a deeper and deeper hole. So now there is mathematically no way possible to bring this whole thing back. And I've said that many times. But I want you to understand is that the world recognizes what's happening here in the United States, and they are moving accordingly, okay? And, a thought popped into my head today as I was musing about what I want to discuss, what I want to bring out, what can I say, what can I not say. And I was thinking to myself that oftentimes throughout the years, especially in the Western banking realm, especially with these quote unquote Western elites, I was thinking to myself that maybe these guys love it. Maybe they get a little stroking of their egos when we're out there and we're actually exposing them a little bit. They might get a little tickled in their ego. They might kind of like it. But this time it's a little different, folks. This time when you look at it, okay, we are witnessing a lot of very, very high-level people about to lose their power, so to speak, and they are freaking out, okay? We are seeing a mass rejection of what has been the preeminent banking system for the last 50 years or so. We're seeing this rejection occur. And now it's nobody wants to go along with the Western banking system anymore. And the power structure is starting to freak out a little bit. Okay, so when you start seeing these rash, assassinations going on, these rash, sloppy hits that are occurring, and then you're starting to see all other ancillary signs. You see gold finally breaking through 1,300. That was a resistance point. It's finally back up there, like I said it would. And gold's not going to go back down. Now you're going to see the march on the way up. But that being said, let's connect the dots a little bit. Earlier in the week, actually sometime towards the end of the week last week, I was on the phone with Doug. I disclosed some info from Doug that I got from my sources. And so this is what I'm going to do. Okay, there's still some. Let's take a couple of these guys. Okay, so far the unofficial count's about 20 dead and counting. What I can tell you is what I know about a few of them. Okay, the first one, and I think Doug kind of highlighted it in his very, very well detailed report. If you folks haven't gotten a chance to read it, I urge you to go to HomelandSecurityUS.com and read that report that Doug Hagman wrote. It was incredible. Very well done, Doug. And so when we look at, let's just take two of these guys. Who would I take? Let's go with. We're going to start with. Man, hold on. I'm going to start with the J.P. Morgan boys. Okay, we're going to start with J.P. Morgan. We're going to go into an economist. We're going to go into a title guy, and we're going to end with a reporter. So hopefully you're going to see some sort of connection come out. Okay. So let's talk about Gabriel McGee. Okay, the guy's 39 years old. He's a J.P. Morgan employee. And this guy died reportedly after falling or, jumping to his death from the 33rd floor of the London headquarters of J.P. Morgan, right on the Canary Wharf area. Okay? Now, this guy was the head of IT and trading platforms for the London office. Okay? So this guy takes a dive after, before he did that, he wrote an email to his girlfriend saying that he'd be home soon. And the next thing you know, this guy's dead. So after he takes that dive, it's reported all throughout the news, throughout the world, and we all get this idea that here's this guy. He was probably upset. He was probably just depressed. And he decided to just take his life jumping off the 33rd floor. There's no coincidence there, of course, the number 33, off the J.P. Morgan headquarters. No big deal, nothing to see here, folks. Carry on. And then this last week, February the 3rd, we've had Ryan Crane, 37 years old, right here from Stamford, Connecticut, head of J.P. Morgan Platform Trading, also an IT specialist, working out of the New York headquarters, and he dies mysteriously in his home. Nothing to see here, folks. Totally unrelated. What's the correlation? The average American's so mentally discombobulated they can't put two and two together. Folks, let me tell you something. I'm going to make it very, very clear for all of you. London is the headquarters for all of the finance, all the market, everything. London is the nexus on which this whole thing spins. Wall Street is just the secondary ancillary to what London is, okay? So the headquarters in New York, in J.P. Morgan, is in constant communication with the heads of J.P. Morgan in London. They are always speaking. They are always talking. They are always in communication. The days in a certain UK bank that I was in, their offices here in the States were in constant communication with their offices back in London. That never ceases nor cuts. Now, guess what? If I am the head of a particular office in one division of the company, and I need to talk to my counterpart, who would that be? Well, let's just say I'm Ryan Crane. Who would my counterpart in London be? Well, I'd be Gabriel McGee. So why did the two guys all of a sudden just drop dead? All of a sudden they suicided themselves. It's pretty interesting, folks. These things do not happen. These things are not random. So what did these two guys, who happen to know each other quite well because they've spoken, they've seen the data, what did they see on their computers? What did they uncover? Let's get into that, shall we? Folks, if you remember, I painted a picture for all of you that J.P. Morgan is nothing but the front arm, the clearing bank, the dirty worker, the physician's assistant to the Federal Reserve. They're the ones who do the dirty work. And I've told you that the Fed is also, that J.P. Morgan, JPM, as I'd like to say, is one of the, what's the word I like to use? It's one of the manipulators of the gold market, the commodities market. Okay? They're caught red-handed multiple times alongside with their cohorts in Goldman Sachs, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England. They're caught red-handed multiple times manipulating the precious metals market, dumping futures contracts on the market, causing the metals to drop in value artificially. All of a sudden, these manipulators, these criminals, decide, hey, you know what? We're going to pull out of the commodities business. Well, you don't say. How does that happen? How does one of the biggest manipulators decide to pull out of the commodities market? Again, that announcement was made during the fall of 2013. And then what else happened in the fall of 2013 as we're moving into the new year, folks? What else exciting happened at the morgue? Well, they just sold their headquarters. Now you might say to yourself, "V, what's the big deal?" Anybody who's from New York, who's seen that headquarters, will tell you it is an absolutely beautiful skyscraper. That is a beautiful piece of property downtown. And they just sold it. That property, folks, is valued at $2.5 to $3 billion. That's that's billion with a B, folks. $2.5 to $3 billion. And J.P. Morgan sells that property to the Chinese to the tune of 720, I think it was 720 or 730 million with an M. So in other words, they've sold it to them at a fraction of the cost of the property. And you might say to yourself, who does that? Who does that? Especially in Manhattan prices. Who does that? Who do you know in Manhattan? I know of no one in Manhattan who sold a property for a third of its value. It's unheard of. And here's another special thing about that headquarters, folks. That headquarters happens to house the largest private vault in the world, or at least one of the largest private vaults in the world. This vault is about 10 stories underground, and it's about the size of a football field. And it connects directly to the New York Fed, which happens to be conveniently right across the street. So it is this building they sold to the Chinese. Now, wait a minute. Why would they sell to the Chinese and then say, okay, we're getting out of the commodities business. Have a nice day, folks. What the heck happened? What's the connection between the getting out of commodities? What's the connection between selling your headquarters, a prestigious building in downtown Manhattan, for a third of its value? What's the connection between two dead guys Okay, both of them, top of the game. Both of them pretty much heading up the same department in two different headquarters, one in New York, one in London. What's the connection with all that? Well, let's take this back a little bit more. Let's take this back to the year 2012, where I, I'm speaking myself in the third person here, came on the radio, and even on Steve's site, I put out an alert. This was during the time, and Steve will remember this very clearly, because me and Steve had quite a few conversations about this. We remember this gentleman by the name of Bruno Ixel. Bruno also goes by the name of London Whale, because he was, he's a pretty hotshot trader. And he was one of the best traders in the city. And for those that don't know, the city means London. There's a strip in the city of London called the City. That's their financial district. That's the nexus, okay? So Bruno Ixel works in the city. And Bruno decided to put a couple of bets in the derivatives market that kind of backfired on him. And when that failure backfired, J.P. Morgan, who used to brag that they've never had a trading loss, and yes, folks, if Jamie Dimon, if J.P. Morgan says that, then I have a bridge on Mars that I would love to sell them. So Bruno has a loss of over $2 billion, it was reported. And from my source from deep within, I figured out very quickly from that information that I received, plus crunching a little bit of my own numbers, but the losses were over $100 billion. That's a billion with a B, folks. I'll call Steve. I'll let Steve know. I'll put up the alert. So here's this massive loss of $100 billion that the London Whale created, but it was first reported to you, the media, as $2 billion, then $2 billion became $5 billion became $9 billion became $10 billion, but the real numbers, folks, is a $100 billion loss. And that was later confirmed by another source and multiple other sources deep within, okay? So what happens here? Well, it turned out that Mr. Bruno Ixel, this is deep information from one of my sources, that Mr. Bruno Ixel, the London Whale, made those bets. And what did he use as collateral for those bets that he lost? Well, it turned out to be rehypothecated Chinese gold. It turned out to be Chinese gold that were then rehypothecated to cover the loss because it became collateral for that bet. And so now J.P. Morgan has it stuck between a rock and a dragon. They got to figure out how to recoup those losses. But most importantly, they got to figure out how to pay off the Chinese. And lo and behold, one of the deals that they've done. Now you've seen the build-up before the actual sale of their headquarters. You saw the massive build-up within their vaults, okay, of gold appearing, and within the next day it's being emptied. Silver appearing, the next day it's empty. Massive amounts. And then the sale happens to the Chinese, the whole building. Folks, that was collateral. That building in downtown New York, as well as all the gold and silver that they held, is collateral, and the massive amounts of fraud that was behind this deal and all the other dealings were uncovered by these two gentlemen. And that is why they were both, as we say in New York, whacked.